Chapter 6. Patrick. Greta said more sharply this time. You need to stop talking while I'm talking. You need to follow my directions and start your homework. Once she was sure each of the students had started his work, she picked up the warm coffee cup and took a sip of the still hot liquid. Her second year of teaching, she had splurged big time on a very expensive coffee cup that said it guaranteed to keep the liquid warm for hours at a time. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. The very promise of hours made Greta jump at the cup. Usually her coffee would stay warm for 10, maybe 20. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Now, she had until her lunch break before she would have to reheat her coffee. Miss Klassen. Greta focused to stare on Patrick. Patrick, Ivy told you not to say my name. I can see your hand. Put your hand in the air and then I can help you. Immediately Patrick's hand shot up. Yes, Patrick. I forgot how to conjugate umbra. Umbra was question number 1. Greta was surprised to find out that in the last 5 minutes, Patrick had managed no more than to write his name and date on the paper. Umbra is a noun. You conjugate verbs. You decline nouns. Turn to page 26 in your book. She spoke without looking at the book. She had the numbers memorized. Follow that chart. Patrick's eyes grew wide as he opened the closed Latin book on his desk. How did you know it was on page 26? I know everything. Patrick, Greta said. Giving the standard answer seemed to pacify the students when it came to the knowledge that filled Greta's head. For a while a lull rested over the classroom. Most students furiously worked, hoping to complete the assignment before the bell announced the end of the day. Despite being the end of the week, Fridays were the busiest days for the students. None of them wanted to have homework on the weekends, so they spent all of their free time writing and studying instead of talking. Greta was fine with Fridays. Normally she looked forward to the weekend and the free time she would have. But not this time. She had a rather annoying protector benefactor that was leaving her alone. For tonight she had stayed at the rather fancy hotel he had put her up in. Thursday and Friday morning had been horrible to try to get up. The bed had been the most comfortable she had ever slept on. It was a king-size bed with more pillows than she had room for. She felt as if she had been transplanted into the life of a princess. Unfortunately she had to work. Work meant not sleeping in. She took another sip of her coffee to ward off the fringes of fatigue. She had to be alert so she could leave school without her protector following her every move. Miss Classen, Patrick said with a half-smile on his face. Greta howled and helped but smile. Every once in a while, Patrick's goofy grin managed to make her forget the fact that he usually irritated her. What is it, Patrick? Instead of responding, he looked at the door. Greta found her eyes following the same path as Patrick. She kept her face neutral, but felt a mixture of annoyance and impulse fill her body. Apparently Alexander had figured she would decide to leave without telling him where she was going. Because, instead of waiting for her at the end of the day in the lobby of the school, he was now outside her classroom door. She had hoped that Alexander wouldn't have been aware that it was only a half day at the school. Greta at school had been to hurry back to the hotel, uproot herself from the too expensive hotel, and move to a different weekly, white motel. Alexander, however, had different ideas, and he was going to make sure Greta did only as he ordered. Luckily he had found out that it was a half-day, or he was certain he would have arrived at school at the usual time only to find that Greta already left. He was also just as certain that she would have found a new motel, leaving him to search the city for her or wait until Monday to follow home again. Boys and girls, Greta said, continue working. You have 5 minutes. Get as much done as you can before the bell rings. With the order given to the students, Greta stood up and ran hand over her skirt to smooth out the invisible wrinkles. Her tall black heels clicked on the floor as she moved to the open door. She was surprised to feel her heart beat the same as her shoes. Then again, she couldn't blame her for the way she reacted around Alexander. He was way too good, looking for his own good. She was sure every woman in her 20s systematically threw herself at him. Alexander hid the smile Greta's heart's beating had attempted to put on his face. He studied her as she walked his direction. Her long hair had been gathered in some concoction on the top of her head. Her eyes had some makeup on them and seemed to tease him with just a glance. His heart jumped. Immediately he regained his legendary control, forcing his body to give away nothing. But he did notice two of the students looking his way. Their lichen hearing had picked up the quick change. He stared at them for only a fraction of a second. But in the lichen world that was more than enough. As a leader of a clan, Alexander had mastered giving orders with a simple look. The two more nosy students immediately returned to their work. "I wasn't expecting you here," Greta said softly, her words being carried no further than Alexander, and definitely not to her students. She leaned against the frame of the door, crossing her arms across her chest in one ankle over the other. On the outside she was the epitome of calmness, while butterflies decided that it was a good time to take residence in her stomach. "I can see that," Alexander said. "You don't look happy to see me. Observant, aren't you? I figured you would attempt to break my rules." The shrill sound of the bell rang down the hallway, as if it were the starting bell of the Kentucky Derby. The school broke into movement. Ignoring Alexander, Greta turned to her students who were stacking their books and gathering what they needed. "Boys and girls, your test is on Monday." She smiled at the groan that filtered through the room. "Push your chairs in, and have your homework on my desk Monday morning. That's 8 in the morning, not 5 after. Do you understand?" "Yes, Miss Clarkson," came the cool response. Greta arrowed her eyes. "Patrick, do you understand?" She shook her head when he only nodded his head. "Say okay." "Patrick, okay." "Miss Clarkson," Patrick said. He stacked his books and stuck two black pens into his pockets. He stopped by Greta's desk. "Can I have a piece of candy?" "Miss Clarkson." His hand rested by the pumpkin jar filled with candy corn. "No, Patrick." "But, Miss Clarkson." She said no. Alexander said with a raised eyebrow, "You do not question those in authority?" "Yes, Mr. Winslow." Patrick hurried from the room but was stopped by Alexander's hand on his arm. Alexander looked at Patrick. "You will apologize to Miss Clarkson." "We don't." "You will apologize," Alexander said one more time. He knew that lichens didn't apologize because it was their way. But Greta was a lichen. He would have Patrick treat Greta the way humans would have treated her. That meant an apology. Patrick knew better than to make Alexander tell him again. If he tried it again, he was sure Alexander would pass it on to his father. And Patrick didn't want to spend the weekend being reprimanded. "Sorry, Miss Clarkson. See you Monday." "Patrick." Greta waited for the boy to dash down the stairs if the hound of heaven was after. With a shake of her head, she turned back for her classroom. "Well, Mr. Winslow, you may as well come in. You may call me Alex," Alexander said as he stepped into the room. He thought about sitting in one of the desks but settled for leaning against the bookshelf in the room. He simply watched Greta move around the classroom, tidying up strewn chairs, lost pens, and notes that had been passed back and forth. Alexander did notice that Greta read the notes and then stored them in a notebook from her desk. Speaking of her desk, Alexander hoped she was planning on cleaning it off before leaving. It had to be 3 weeks thick of paper. He wasn't sure how she managed to find what she was looking for. "Mr. Winslow, you will call me Alex," he stated as he pushed himself to his full height. He had gotten distracted while watching Greta and hadn't noticed that she had gathered her things was now standing in front of him. "I don't use nicknames," Greta said offhandedly. "I need to look." "Then you will call me Alexander," he interrupted. "I will call you anything you like if you will only move out of my way so I can lock this door." Alexander would have normally moved, but he was so blinded by Greta that he didn't notice that she had purposefully not used his name in any form. "You have yet to call me by my name, Alexander," Greta sighed in frustration. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Noban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." With a smile and a small bow that hinted of a time long past, Alexander moved away from the door and allowed Greta to lock it. He immediately held out his hand for her heavy bag and was grateful to notice that she handed it over without a spewing of feminism. Greta waited until Alexander had walked her to her car before asking for her bag back. Once it was stowed carefully in her passenger side seat, she turned to Alexander. The wind blew a stray strand of hair across her face. She moved it as she spoke. "Thank you for all your help." The way Greta's fingers slid across her soft skin and tucked her hair behind her ear drove Alexander to distraction. Greta was halfway done with her speech about not needing his help anymore before he started to pay attention. "Would you like to run that by me again?" Greta felt the chill from his voice hit her, but she was a teacher with a thick skin. "I said that I don't need your help anymore. I want to thank you for everything you have done for me, but I won't need you anymore." Alexander was going to tell Greta exactly what he thought of her plan, but his attention was pulled to another car in the parking lot. "I need to talk to someone really quickly. Then I will come back and deal with you." "Deal with me?" she asked with a laugh. His heart jumped at the sound of her laugh. He held out his hand. "Give me your keys." "Why? I don't want you driving off while I take care of something." Greta pulled the keys from her purse and slapped them into Alexander's hand. "You are impossible." Mr. was low. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm," he said as he slipped Greta's keys into his pocket. "Now wait here for me." Greta followed Alexander's eyes to where he was looking and immediately pulled him to a stop. Greta knew his intention was Patrick's father's car, since she had seen Alexander step in between Patrick and her. She figured he was going to pass that information on to his father. "No, mister," was low. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "No, Alexander." Giving in to his name because she had to focus on his destination. "I do not want you talking to Patrick's father. He disrespected you," Alexander pointed out. "He never should have done it. And his father will make sure it won't happen again." Greta noticed that the students that were running around playing outside as their parents waited for them had stopped to watch Greta and Alex's confrontation in the parking lot. Immediately she dropped that hand on Alexander's arm and took a step back. "If I don't fight my own battles with the students, they will lose respect for me. When, or if, I decide that Patrick's father should be brought into it, I will be the one to talk to him." "Absolutely," Alexander agreed. "I'll be right back." Sighing heavily, Greta leaned a hip against her car and watched Alexander walk off with her keys. Although Lycans didn't have a sense to know when eyes were drilling into their backs, Alexander felt the glare from Greta. Instead of causing irritation, he felt the smile color his face. He headed to the black car that stood idling in a parking space. He was surprised to see William step out of the car. William was the leader of the Getz clan. Since Alexander was also a leader, William would never slight him by staying in his car. William stood by his car, leaning against the door as he watched his two young children race around the field as they tried to catch or avoid being caught. He also caught the wary look that Patrick sent their way. William shook his head. He figured that Alexander was about to tell him something about Patrick. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm," William said, extending his hand. "I had heard that you were the protector assigned to the school and the new teacher." Alexander accepted the offered hand with a firm shake. He had also caught Patrick's look towards the two and didn't want him to know what was being said. He switched to Portuguese, knowing the younger boy was probably unaware of the language. "Have you met the teacher yet?" "Greta Klassen," William asked, switching with ease to Portuguese. He glanced over Alexander's shoulder to the very irritated woman. "She doesn't seem happy right now." Alexander shrugged a shoulder as if he cowled with Greta's state of happiness. "I had a run-in with your boy today in Miss Klassen's class." William immediately pushed himself to his full height. He was about to call Patrick over when Alexander's hand stopped him. "What? He's my son." Greta doesn't want me to interfere. She wants to handle it herself, and I can't blame her. She has to have the respect of the students without having them think that she has no authority. William let the words mull for a moment and then nodded his head. He understood the necessity of having authority over those under him. I won't bring it up with him yet. What did he do? She told him that he couldn't have any of the candy on her desk. He questioned her again. Most humans would have thought that Alexander's concerns were over the top. But the Lycan world was the human world. They didn't do things the same way. Questioning an order, even what as simple as no to candy, was dealt with lightly. Obedience meant life. Disobedience could result in death. It was too dangerous to have any Lycan, whether a child or not, questioning any order given. And what did Greta? Miss Klassen? Alexander interrupted. He did not appreciate other Lycans saying Greta's name, as if he knew her or should be close with her. William kept his brow from inching upward at the correction. What did Miss Klassen do? I stepped in before she had a chance. Alexander thought back to the way Greta ordered him around without a thought to the fact that Alexander was a leader of a clan, and Greta was only a female human. Although I know she would have been able to handle it. Patrick should know better. I just wanted you to be aware. I also want you to be aware that Miss Klassen would prefer to handle this on her own. William nodded. You better get back to your girl. She looks like she is about to come over her and lay into you. Instead of being worried, Alexander only turned, leaned against William's car and studied Greta, who had her hand on her hip. She isn't quite aware of who I am, or how most people defer to me. Run for your money. Oh yeah, I have to get back to her before she decides to simply hotwire her car and leave me here. Has she told you yet about next week? Next week. Alexander spun around and faced William. Miss Klassen has been picked as the chaperone that will take 3 of the students to Prague for the week-long computer trip. Patrick is one of them. She hasn't mentioned it. Alexander said. Neither has anyone else for that matter. In her protector. Greta's head went up as she heard Alexander's last statement. She knew, as the children glanced over at the 2 men, that they had heard it too, forgetting the fact that she wanted nothing more than to go something to eat. Get out of her shoes, and plant herself in front of a television as she graded the stack of papers in her bag. Greta headed over to Alexander and William. In any other situation, Greta would have found William an opposing man. He was well over 6 feet tall, putting him a half a head taller than even the tallest men Greta had known before. Even in the suit, William's perfect body couldn't be hidden. His muscles filled the material and clearly showed his strength. However, there were 2 reasons Greta couldn't find him opposing. First of all, she taught his son. For some odd reason, Greta always saw the students and their parents and had no trouble never being intimidated. The second reason was standing next to William. Alexander. Although William was fine in his own right, Alexander was the epitome of perfection. Mentally she ordered her face to not show a single emotion she was feeling. When both William and Alexander turned to look at her, Greta was sure they could read her mind. Too bad she was nearly there. She couldn't turn back now. Hello, Mr. Det, Greta said, offering her hand. We haven't met yet. I am Greta Klassen. I teach Patrick Latin, Greek, and Spanish. It's a pleasure to meet you. Patrick talks a lot about you. Greta visible cringed. I hope the stories are good. William laughed and nodded his head. How is he in your classes? Greta spared a glance at Alexander and then turned back to William. Yes, fine. Before William was able to respond, she turned to Alexander. You need to keep your voice down. The students are starting to notice. And, for the last time, stop telling people you are my protector. I don't need one. You speak Portuguese. Doesn't everyone? Greta asked. She was completely serious. A side effect of learning too many languages when she had been younger. She realized that Alexander had achieved in getting her off topic. She should have noticed what he was doing because it was one of her students' favorite ways to distract her during teaching. Don't change the subject. And keep your voice down. And I would like my keys back. She doesn't know who I am. Alexander said to William in Chinese. Perhaps not. Greta said, not realizing that she was answering his comment in English. But I know that you are no longer my protector. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. You speak Chinese? William asked, surprised at the information that hadn't quite made its rounds. Because Greta had never interviewed for the job, Greta's background hadn't been discussed with the Lycan clans at the school. What languages don't you speak? She shrugged a shoulder. Not because she didn't know, but more because she just cowled and gave it much thought. Her stomach was starting to tie in knots from hunger. She ignored William and turned to Alexander. She put her hand out. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Now, instead of keys, Alexander slipped his hand into hers. Turning to William, he gave the leader a small gesture with his head. Get, I'm sure we'll see each other again. William nodded to Alexander and said to Greta, It was a pleasure to meet you. Miss Klassen, come, Alexander said to Greta. He practically pulled Greta back to her car, not allowing her any time to respond to William. He dug the keys from his pocket and placed them in her hand and folded her fingers over them. He took her chin in his hand and forced her eyes to meet his. You will follow me. He put his free finger on her lips. There was no question in there. Just do as I say. She spoke around his finger. I don't have time to listen to you. I need something to eat. And if you don't move your finger, I may just start with that. Alexander smiled. He actually smiled. We'll start with something to eat. He opened her car door and waited for her to slide in. Follow me. Miss Klassen. For some reason, Greta felt as if Alexander was talking about more than just a restaurant. She started the car after Alexander. She was going to get into a lot of trouble if she blindly followed Alexander's order. She could just feel it. Chapter 7. Miss Klassen. Miss Klassen. The young voice was particularly loud as it echoed in the classroom. Miss Klassen. Glancing up from the paper she was correcting, Greta studied the eager student who had slid into the classroom at a run. What is it? Isabella. Miss Klassen. Look. Isabella ran to the desk and thrust a letter onto the stack of papers on Greta's desk. Look. 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 Greta smiled up at the excited sixth grader. Calm down. Isabella. Ill look. She took the opened envelope and removed the letter. She had started to read it, but was surprised to hear Isabella tell her everything it said. I was chosen to participate in the Computer Olympics. Can you believe it? I get to go. I've wanted to go all my life, and this year I was chosen. Can you believe it? I get to go with Sophia and Patrick. Greta returned the letter to the envelope and gave it back to Isabella. Isabella, you're not surprised that you were picked. You have a way with computers. As for not being able to go before, you know you have to be in 6th grade. Isabella laughed. I know. I'm just so excited. Are you going to be the teacher who is taking us? Please say yes. Please say yes. Please say yes. You know I am. Greta said with a laugh. We will be leaving on Wednesday, and we won't be back until next Wednesday. We'll be gone for a whole week. With a squeal of delight, Isabella left the room as a near run, almost colliding with 3 desks and another student on her way out. Greta smiled at Isabella's excitement. She had already dealt with Sophia and her excitement, which closely mirrored Isabella's. Patrick, the 3rd student going with her, had reacted with reserved excitement. She was surprised. 7th grade boys, although super excited about something, certainly cowed and let on that something as lame as computers was exciting. Thinking about Patrick's reaction had her going back to Alexander's reaction. He definitely didn't react like a 6th grade girl. Unlike Patrick, to my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Alexander had no problem letting his feelings about her going show. He had been mad. Greta was sure that if there hadn't been other people in the restaurant, Alexander would have thrown his plate at the wall and raised his voice to blister her ears. Instead, he simply scolded her in several different languages for agreeing to a trip without getting his permission first. It wasn't until Greta threatened to leave the restaurant that Alexander stopped his rant. For some reason, which she was going to think about, she didn't want Alexander to be disappointed, so she agreed to stay at the hotel he had paid for until she left for Prague. Once she came back, she promised him that they would go find a house for her, and she wouldn't put up a fight. It seemed to soothe Alexander enough so that she was able to leave the restaurant with his permission. Perhaps Alexander was finally starting to realize that she was capable of protecting herself. She didn't give it any more thought as her last class of the day came into the room. She had students to focus on and a trip to a foreign country in a bit over a day. What she didn't know was that down on the first floor there was a meeting between her protector and the school. And her protector wasn't happy. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Caroline said, Greta is the best teacher for the trip. She speaks Czech fluently. She has even been to Prague. Lived there for half a year. She is perfect. And she is mine. Alexander hissed. I am her protector. And I wasn't even told about this trip until last Friday. And not by anyone from the school. You would have been informed about it. Gregor insisted. It was only decided upon a couple weeks ago that Klassen would be the one going. Alexander wanted to pace the floor. But he remained sitting. He knew that, although he was Greta's protector, he was going to be able to get the school to remove her from the trip. He also knew, because of the dinner on Friday, that he was going to get Greta to back down from the trip on her own. The only thing he was going to accomplish was to make sure the school never attempted anything without contacting him first. I have 2 of my men going, William said, and I know Edmund has 3 going with Isabella. Greta will be more than safe. You are going to send Lycans with Greta? Alexander asked. Although his voice was low and conversational, it contained enough anger to convey his feelings about the entire trip. I will not have random Lycans around Greta, no matter what clan they come from. My men. I mean no disrespect. Alexander interrupted William's immediate defense of his clan members. I know your men are loyal to you and yours. Greta is mine. Her protection will not be their first priority. He was complaining about the fact, but pointing out a truth about Lycans. They protected their clan members, especially their females and children. They also protect their clan over the human. She isn't going into a war zone, Carol Inen said. It's just Prague. It's for a week. The arrangements have been made. They are staying at the best hotel in the city. A car service has been ordered and will take them where they need to go. And did I mention that Greta has lived in Prague? She knows more than any other teacher we have ever sent on this trip. She's mine. Alexander repeated for the 3rd time. I know that it has been nearly half a century since this school has had a protector, but I still remember how it is done. He stared at Gregor, William, and Carol Inen. I am to be consulted on any decision that affects Greta. She is not allowed to do anything other than the normal day, 2 day school activities without my say-so. Carol Inen smiled happily. Well, traditionally, the language teacher was the one who took the students to the Computer Olympics when it was held out of the country. So, had Greta actually done a proper interview, this would have been in her job description. You're not forbidden to go. Gregor informed him. Neither William nor Edmund would allow you to be with their children, but you can go to Prague. Alexander had already thought about going, but his clan needed him that weekend. Any other week, he would have been able to handle having Greta leave. This one week he was free to follow her to Prague. Any other trips Ost-Osten Prep property will be cleared through me first. Do you understand? You aren't part of the decision-making of the school. Gregor reminded him. When Western Prep had been in its infancy, Alexander had been asked to be part of the board, just like other Lycan leaders in the area. Alexander had refused the moment he found out that human children were going to be allowed to attend school with the Lycan children. I may not be on the board, Alexander said, his voice going ice cold, but anything that will take Greta off this property will be cleared through me. You and the entire board asked me to be her protector. That puts my decisions for Greta over any the board can make for her. Gregor and William shared a look. Alexander didn't miss it. I know that you thought I would be an absentee protector. But the decision has been made. I am her protector. I cannot be removed from this position. You," he glared at Gregor especially hard, "will abide by my decisions I make as her protector because that is the law made by the board of Western Prep." Gregor and the rest of the board had thought that Haller would make the perfect protector because he had been absent from all the events at Western Prep. He hadn't seemed to care what was happening at Western Prep, who the teachers were, or what the students were doing. They had thought that to keep the power they had over Western Prep, they would choose a protector who would stay absent. Alexander had surprised them all by even meeting the teacher he had been chosen to protect. They hadn't expected even that, much less that he would be involved or have a say in what she would be doing. Luckily, the trip to Prague had already been put into motion before Alexander could squash the idea. The board had purposely kept the details from Alexander and did it too late for him to stop the trip. Unfortunately, that trick wouldn't work again. If they tried it, Gregor was sure that one of the board would be without a head. Alexander pushed his chair away from the table, stood up, and turned his steady gaze on William. "You will tell your men to stay away from Greta. She will be protected, but not bothered on this trip. I am a leader of my clan." William clarified, "You come very close to ordering me. Pass it on to Edmund as well." Alexander ordered instead of relenting his position. He had been irritated with the whole situation and felt no need to be diplomatic. He left the room, slamming the door behind him to further drive home the point of his irritation. Achius irritated. Carol and N shared with the men in the room. She turned to Gregor. "You said he would be the perfect protector. I assumed when you said that, you meant that he wouldn't be interfering, not that he would perform his job to the letter. This is a bit unexpected," Gregor admitted. "But Greta is going to Prague. If we run into another situation, we will find a way to work with Alex." "I know Alex," William said. "I am warning you that the next time Alex will not be so easygoing. He will refuse to allow Greta to do something he doesn't approve first. You are not going to want to face Alex's wrath for going around his job as protector." "Face his wrath?" Carol in N asked. "Did we just witness that?" William laughed without mirth. "That was Alex being amicable. He won't be so again. We can take care of it," Gregor replied surely. William only gave a curt nod and then left the room. Gregor and the rest of the board wore stare of what Alexander was like. They didn't understand that they were playing with fire. Alexander would burn those that hurt what was his to protect. Because he had taken on the job as Greta as protector, he would give her no less than his life. That protection didn't come lightly to Alexander's mind. The board of Western Prep had been warned by Alexander. William could only hope that they took his warning seriously. Chapter 8. "I can't believe that we are here," Isabella said as the small group were forwarded by the baggage claim in the very busy airport. "This is the most exciting thing to ever happen to me." "Yeah," Patrick agreed sullenly. "I guess it's a little cool." Greta hid a smile at Patrick's attitude. She would expect nothing less from the boy. All morning, and from the moment they had reached the airport, Patrick had been trying to hide his excitement. She had caught moments of it when he hadn't been able to hide it. But she said nothing because she knew he was trying so hard to look nonchalant about the whole situation. "Miss Classen, where are we going to first?" Sophia asked quietly. Of all the students at Western Prep, and even at the other schools Greta had taught at, Sophia was the quietest ever. Most often, Greta was sure she hadn't heard Sophia's actual question but read her lips instead. "We'll head to the hotel. Then we'll have supper. And tomorrow we head to the Computer Olympics." "I can hardly wait," Sophia whispered. Greta smiled at the small sign of excitement from Sophia. She pointed to the bags that started coming on the baggage carousel. "They're all bags." Her dark purple luggage was easy to spot, and Greta soon had her 3 bags off the carousel and next to her. "Miss Classen," Isabella said in complete despair, "I can't find my other bag." She was the last one waiting for her bags. "Maybe it got lost." "Don't worry, Isabella," Greta said. "Well, just wait a bit longer." 5 minutes passed, and then 10. Finally the bag popped off the conveyor belt. squealing with excitement. Isabella grabbed her second bag. "I'm ready. I have everything," Greta nodded. Being the chaperone of the trip, Greta had all her senses on high alert to any danger that might be around. She had been given charge of the 3 students and had every intention of bringing them back safely. Having traveled nearly her entire life, Greta had spent an abnormal amount of time in airports of every kind. She was used to seeing the different kinds of people at the airport. Some were excited for the upcoming trip. Others were more concerned about leaving or flying or some other weight on their mind. Shouts of joy weren't uncommon as someone was welcomed back home. What was uncommon were the men that were intently watching her and her students. Although they had luggage, they were all small carry-ons. They talked with no one in the airport, didn't seem to be waiting for anyone, and were in the pick-up area and not the drop-off area. They didn't even talk with each other. They were odd. Too odd for Greta's liking. Patrick watched Greta for a second and followed where she was looking. "Oh, they were sent by my father. They are the guard from my fathers." Patrick realized he was about to say clan, giving too much information to a human. He quickly corrected his statement. "They are the guard from my father. And mine," Isabella said with a laugh as she waved at one of the set of men. "My father worries way too much. We are just going to the Computer Olympics. What can possibly go wrong?" Greta turned to Sophia. "Did your father send a SWAT team as well?" Sophia shook her head. Patrick shared a look with Isabella. Both of them, being Lycans, knew that Sophia was one and would therefore not have a father with a clan of Lycans able to be sent to protect her. Greta paid one more look at the imposing men. She supposed, as she swung one bag on her shoulder and picked up the other 2, that she was glad they were on her side. "We should get going. Boys and girls. Our car should be outside. We have a big day tomorrow. I'm so excited I doubt he'll sleep," Sophia whispered as the 4 started walking through the airport. Having traveled for so much of her young life, Greta knew very much the excitement Sophia was talking about. She also knew that Sophia, and the other 2, would be asleep as soon as they had eaten. Traveling halfway around the world would mess with anyone's sleep schedule. The students thought that they were too excited to ever sleep. But Greta knew better. After finding the driver holding the sign for Western Prep, Greta ushered the 3 students into the Waittown car. Waves of the Czech language floated around her, pulling her back to her first time she had arrived there when she had only been 7. The city had mesmerized her then, and she found that she was still pulled to the life that swarmed around her. The ride to the hotel went quickly since their flight had arrived before rush hour. With their bags, the 4 entered the hotel. Greta scanned the area, looking for the shadows sent by Patrick's and Isabella's parents, but they were nowhere to be found. The manager of the hotel spoke in flawless English as he handed over the room keys. "Here are the keys. You have a copy of each key. There has been a mistake," Greta said, interrupting the stuffy man. "No mistake. The rooms have been reserved." Greta held up a hand. "These rooms are not next to each other. They are on the same floor," the manager said. Greta smiled, a sure sign to anyone who knew her that she was about to get nasty. A polite nasty, but still nasty. "Listen, I do not care that the rooms are on the same floor. You will give me 4 rooms next to each other." "Oh, Miss Classen, this is highly irregular." Greta sighed. "Perhaps you're right. Thank you for understanding." Kelton waved his hand to a bellboy and pointed to the baggage. "Oh no," Greta said to the man who came over. "We won't be staying. Come on, boys and girls. We'll go to a more accommodating hotel." "But, Miss Classen," Kelton said in complete surprise, "surely you do not intend. If this hotel won't give me what I want, I am sure that there is one hotel that will do as I ask." Kelton visibly paled at the thought that he was about to lose the hotel for very important guests. "I think I can work something out. Miss Classen," not giving in an inch. Greta didn't even bother to drop her bags. She wouldn't be staying in a hotel when the rooms of the students she was in charge of were spread down a long hallway. "I have 2 rooms." "Excellent," Greta said. She saw the smile of the man and gladly crushed his hopes of them staying as she continued talking. I'm sure 2 other people would love to have them. Students. Oh look. Kelton said quickly. I have 4 rooms next to each other on the 14th floor. Greta flashed a true smile. Wonderful. Thank you for working things out. She accepted the keys and ushered the students to the waiting elevators. Chess's bossy Papa. Isabella whispered to Patrick. Patrick scowled. Why do we have to be right next to each other? I think I would be able to protect myself from anything this place has to offer. Isabella whispered as her eyes bulged out. We can't be talking about. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. My father's not here to stop me, Patrick scoffed. And don't be thinking about telling him. I won't. Isabella and Patrick picked up the pace to catch up with Sophia and Greta. Greta unlocked the rooms and made sure her students were settled. Greta was starting not happy about the room arrangements that had been made, but now she was also wary. It seemed odd for Western Prep to have made room arrangements where she would be down the hall from the students. If she had been on a different floor, Greta wouldn't have waited for the hotel to fix the rooms. She would have left immediately to a different hotel. For now she would simply heighten her awareness. She would also order supper instead of taking the students out. They would be too exhausted to think it was odd that they were eating in. But for now, Greta would do that until tomorrow when they could get into a routine. Chapter 9. Greta kept her eye on her students as they bounded across the street to the street vendor selling hot pretzels. Although they had a giant breakfast, they had stopped at 3 different vendors on the way from the hotel to the convention center where the Computer Olympics were being held. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Miss Claassen, Isabella said as she came bounding back over nearly running into her teacher. I got you a pretzel. Thanks. Isabella. Greta took a bite of the soft pretzel, which brought back the first time she had one just like it so long ago. We need to hurry if we want to get to the convention center to sign in before the Olympics begin. Are we going to be late? Sophia whispered, suddenly worried. I made sure we left with plenty of time. Greta reassured her. We could have taken the car provided for us. Patrick reminded her. I don't know why we had to walk. Greta stopped and put a hand out to stop Patrick from moving further. Listen, Patrick, you will change your attitude right now, or I will take you out of the Olympics. I was just saying. Did I ask for an explanation? She didn't wait for an answer. Just say okay. Miss Claassen. Okay. Miss Claassen. Patrick finally grudgingly said. He wouldn't have given in so quickly if he hadn't caught sight of his clan members following the group. Although they weren't close to them, he knew they could easily tune their hearing and catch the conversation. Any disobedience to his teacher would be promptly his father. For the last 2 blocks to the convention center, the 3 young teenagers stayed by Greta's side. As they entered the building, they were bombarded by the conversations taking place by the hundreds of teenagers and adults in the room. Immediately Greta picked up several different languages being rattled off by the different cultures represented at the Computer Olympics. This way, Greta said, pointing to the tables off the right under the sign printed in several different languages that labeled the area for registration. She headed over to the only free person. I'm here to check in my students. Name of the school. The young woman said in English with a thick Czech accent. Western Prep. The woman's head snapped up as did the older man standing next to her. Immediately he stepped over. I'll take this. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. He waited for Irena to take the group he had been handling and then turned to Greta. I am Joseph. I will help you. You are from Western Prep. In the United States. Greta nodded her head. I have 3 students. Joseph typed a few things in the computer. Ah, here it is. Patrick, Isabella Dimmick, and Sophia Patterson. That's the 3 I came with. Greta replied. She waited as Joseph found the 3 folders. These are for the students. They will go in through those doors. He pointed to the left side of the building. You can come back at 3 at the end of the day. They'll wait for them in there. Joseph felt his face drain of color. Oh, we don't really allow teachers to go in with the students. Well, I'm glad you'll make this exception for me, Greta said with a flashing smile. We can't make exceptions. The Computer Olympics are only for the students. Adults aren't allowed in the room. Joseph quickly tried to make the rules clear. Well, then, Greta set the folders on the desk. Well, be going. Thank you so much. Greta made a few steps away before Joseph could reaction. Wait. Please. Let me find out if we can bend the rules a bit. That would be wonderful, Greta replied as she moved back to the desk. She set her arms on the counter and rested against it as she waited. Soon, the man that Greta could only assume was in charge of the Computer Olympics due to the suit he wore, walked over to Joseph. What is the problem? The man whispered harshly in Czech. This is the teacher from Western Prep, pretending to be ignorant of the foreign language being spoken so clearly in front of her. Greta watched, with a clueless look on her face, as the man appeared to be as stunned as Joseph had been. Since this was only her first year at Western Prep, Greta simply figured that Western Prep must have a reputation that she just wasn't completely aware of. And the new man asked. She wants to go into the room with her students, Joseph said. I told her that teachers weren't allowed. You imbecile, the new man hissed under his voice. The other teachers are heading into the room. She can't get Western Prep and be an idiot. She's bound to notice. I was just thinking. You are not paid to think, the new man interrupted. I will do the thinking. Now go. I will take care of this. The new man didn't even bother to wait for Joseph to leave. He turned his attention to Greta and smiled the professional smile he had mastered only weeks after starting in the customer service system. He switched to flawless English. So you are from Western Prep? Yes, and I've even been told that I won't be allowed to be in the room with my students. Oh, the man practically crooned. Joseph was misinformed. You can go into the room. There are chairs along the wall for the teachers and adults who are accompanying the minors. Of course, there can be no interactions with the students. Greta nodded her head. Thank you for clearing that all up. She took the folders off the counter. Well, just head in there now. Excellent. The presentation will begin in 15 minutes. I can't believe we are really here. Isabella squealed as she held tightly to Sophia's arm. Can you believe both of us are here? I can't wait to begin. Me neither, Sophia whispered. There are so many people here. Let's find a spot. Isabella suggested. Come on. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Her words came to an abrupt stop. She whirled around, facing the man in the left corner. What is he doing here? Your father knew about this. But he doesn't know. Patrick replied quickly and harshly. And he doesn't need to know, and neither does my father. Need to know what? Greta asked, coming up to the conversation at the tail end. Oh, nothing, Patrick said nonchalantly. He glared at Isabella, warning her silently to say nothing to Greta. He started for the opposite side of the room when Isabella pulled him aside. What? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. He isn't from my clan, she whispered as she jerked her head towards the unknown man. Is he from yours? Patrick thought about lying, but the Lycan culture had been so ingrained in him that he couldn't even think about a decent lie. No, he isn't. But we don't need to worry. We both have a guard from our clans here. Maybe H.E. is a guard for someone else here. Maybe we should tell Miss Claassen. Isabella suggested. Patrick shook his head. She's human. There is nothing we can tell her. We'll be just fine, I guess. Isabella whispered as she kept her eyes on the man in the corner. Greta scanned the room carefully. Several dozen chairs were against the walls and quickly filled up with teachers. Joseph's words about them not allowing teachers in the room came back to Greta's mind. So did the looks of the 3 people who had heard that they were from Weston Prep. Something was wrong. Greta could have been wrong. Although she told her students that she was never wrong, it wasn't exactly true. She could be wrong with the entire situation in Prague. Yet, being wrong was something she could live with. Not being wrong, and not having done something was not something she could live with. Patrick, Isabella, Sophia, I need to talk to you for a second, Greta said quietly. She moved to the wall, making sure that no one was around and still kept her voice low. You 3 will listen to me immediately. It doesn't matter what I say or when I say it. If I tell you to do something, you will do it the second I say it. Do you understand? Yes, Isabella said, responding as you would to anyone in her clan who was in charge of her. Sophia gave her whispered response next. Patrick nodded his head. No, Patrick, Greta said with a touch of ice in her voice. Say it aloud. Yes, Miss Classen. Patrick agreed. Greta could tell that Patrick was about to add something else to his statement, so she spoke first. Come follow me. I will show you where to sit. She filtered her way through the room. She pointed to the 3 computers closest to the outside exit door. Let's take these 3. They'll be sitting over there. Oh, I'm sorry, came the stilted English words. Greta turned around and faced Joseph. That's quite okay. Everything is fine now. No, Joseph said, his face slowly flaming into a beet red. Your computers for the students are on the other side of the room. He pointed to the corner on the opposite side of the room. That's so wonderful, Greta said. She walked around the 3 computers she had already chosen and set the folders with her students' names next to the keyboards. Joseph tugged on his tie. He cleared his throat when he noticed that although Greta had seemed to hear him, she was moving to the other side of the room. You see, the computers have names for each student. Greta smiled coldly. Well, since these computers seem to be lacking any names, we will take these. You can just let whoever put us over there know that now we are over here. This is highly irregular, Joseph said. Perhaps I can talk to the person in charge, Greta said. Is there a problem? The same man from the counter was back. Greta turned to face him. Your employee won't let us choose a computer. Well, the computers have been designated. Greta interrupted him. Is there a reason that we can't choose the computers? Are some computers better than others? Is this a rigged Olympics? Her voice purposely got louder until she was sure that other teachers and parents were listening in on the conversation. Rigged computers. The whispers were starting. The adults in the room started to look suspiciously at the computers they had chosen for their students. No, the man said loudly to be heard. All the computers are fine. They are all the same. Nothing is rigged. Lol. Please choose any computers for your students. The room is at your disposal. Greta should have felt satisfied that she had been able to choose where her students were going to sit. But she just didn't. Cautiously she sat down on the edge of the chair near the door. She was close enough to her students to hear their conversations, and yet she still didn't feel comfortable with the distance of 3 yards between them. She didn't like it. The situation was weird, and not normal Western prep weird. It was a scary weird that had the hair on the back of her neck standing up. She had to wonder how other teachers from Western prep dealt with the weirdness. Since they had arrived in Prague, people seemed interested in the fact that she was the teacher from Western prep. Greta scanned the room as a man addressed the students in the room. Teachers and parents lined the walls. They had various things to pass the time. Some had books, tablets, or just plain pen and papers. They seemed to be ready to settle down for the long haul. Greta didn't notice much about the other teachers, but she did notice the lack of worry in the other teachers. Soon the room started with a buzz as the students began the day. Time passed, yet Greta never seemed to lose the worry that sank deeper into the room. There was something very wrong. The main doors opened and 3 men slipped into the room. Greta's eyes were on them immediately. They were the trouble. She knew without needing any confirmation that they were what had been bothering her since she had stepped foot into the convention center. Because the overhead lights had been half, dimmed to make it easier on the students' eyes while they stared at the computer screens. Greta couldn't make out the faces of the men. They stayed near the wall, but made their way to the far corner where Patrick, Isabella, and Sophia should have been sitting. Greta kept her eyes on the men, watching their every move. The three men moved to stand behind the students at the computers. Although they were across the room, Greta saw all the men move in sync with each other. 1 second they were standing behind the students, and the next they had moved, wrapped their hand over their mouths, and slipped an needle into the necks of the students. Hell broke out. Students and teachers were screaming. Chairs were pushed over as people abandoned them in a hurry. It started as a wave, starting closest to the 3 now passed-out students, and rippled across the room. Greta, however, having had an eye on the men's actions, responded quicker. As soon as the men had covered the mouths of the students on the other side of the room, she was on her feet. "Come now," she whispered to her students. For the first time, her rule of not questioning her rules came in handy. Patrick, Isabella, and Sophia were out of their seats before they realized what they were doing. "Follow me," Greta whispered. She grabbed hold of Sophia's and Isabella's hands and pulled them towards the door she had gratefully chosen to sit next to. As the room burst into chaos, Greta pushed open the outside door just wide enough for her and the 3 students to slip through. "Miss Klassen," Sophia whispered in complete fright. "What is it?" "Nothing. Yet," Greta said. The 4 were in the alley behind the convention center. The sound of the cars from the road in front of the convention center could be heard as they drove by. Greta thought about finding a taxi and heading back for the hotel, but quickly nixed the idea. She needed time to think. "Miss Klassen," Patrick started, but was quickly interrupted by his teacher. "We will talk in a bit," Greta said. "Come follow me." She led the students deeper down the alley away from the front of the convention center. Once they reached the end of the alley, she flagged down a taxi and gave the name of the hostel she had stayed in when she had been in college. She needed time to think. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Chapter 10. Alexander jumped off his car and headed up the steps of the house without bothering to shut the door of the car. His actions had been so quick that the Getz clan members didn't react until Alexander was nearly through the front door. The full-grown lichen males shifted to their lichen forms, intending on stopping Alexander from getting any further into the house. Alexander responded completely out of character for a visiting lichen in another clan's property, especially the manor. In the blink of an eye, Alexander had shifted into his lichen form, with anger flowing through his body. Alexander had no problem shaking off 2 of the lichens, throwing them against the wall where their bodies smashed into the drywall. The other 2 lichens jumped on Alexander, pulling him to the ground. They managed to hold him down, despite him getting the upper hand twice and slicing the face of the unfortunate lichen closer to him. It took 2 more lichens to come into the fray to get Alexander under control. "Release me," Alexander ordered his deep lichen voice. "Stop." William stepped into the room, taking in the entire fight that had only taken several seconds to happen and be contained. He looked at the 2 lichens still holding a struggling Alexander. "Stand him up." Alexander was pulled to his feet. He growled deep in his throat when he couldn't get out of the hold on his arms. "Tell them to release me," he ordered William. Normally, he wouldn't have dared to order another leader on his own property, but Alexander had more important things to worry about than offending the sensibilities of William. "You dare to change on my land," William said as he ignored Alexander's order. "My men have taken that as a threat." The approach of 4 cars on the land stopped everything going on in the house. The scent that floated to the house had William's eyes shifting into black orbs. He glared at Alexander. "Bringing your men onto this property could be considered an act of war. My men will stop them at all costs from coming into this house." It took all his willpower, but Alexander was able to shift back into his human form. "I will talk to them." William waved off the lichens holding Alexander. Spinning around, Alexander went to the front door. Aatdu's men were standing in a semicircle around the base of the steps. Despite being surrounded by 20 of William's men who had all changed into lichen form, The 8 men were still human. Anyone else would have been nervous, if not terrified, in that situation. But not Alexander's men. They looked bored with the whole situation. "You will wait here for me," Alexander ordered his men. "You will not attempt to enter this house or confront the men here. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." Ivan was Alexander's second in command. Alexander turned to William. "May my second come into the manor?" William could have denied the request. It wouldn't have been the first time he would have denied a sec an entrance into the manor with the leader. But he nodded his head. Alexander's men would be more relaxed if their leader wasn't alone in the manor. Knowing the short fuses Alexander's men had, William figured it was best to allow Ivan in with Alexander. "We'll talk in conference room," William said. He nodded his head to include Sergei, his own second in command. The 4 Lycans entered the large conference room. Alexander couldn't say that he was surprised to see Edmund and his second already sitting at the large red table. He probably would have been more surprised if Edmund was there. "Sit," William ordered. Like Alexander, he didn't have the time to dance a Lycan culture. The 4 new arrivals quickly took seats around the table. Each leader and his second sat next to each other. "Have you heard?" Edmund asked Alexander, although the anger on his face pretty much gave him the answer. "I got the news and came over here," Alexander said. "Is there any more information?" William shook his head. "All I know is that 3 roguelikans attacked the convention center, and Clarson and the 3 students are missing." "Is she part of this?" Edmund asked. Alexander shook his head. "She doesn't even know that we exist, much less how to contact a roguelikan and set up the kidnapping of 2 of our children and a human child." William put in, "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." Alexander asked aloud, "Maybe, but we all know it is not probable. Who do you have over there? Both of you had a guard sent with you children. Have they contacted you? Found them? Bringing them back?" If Lycans were inclined to wring their hands, it was what Edmund would be doing. However, Lycans didn't wring their hands, so Edmund sat stiff and straight without seeming to be affected by the conversation. Of the 3 sent to protect Isabella, only one survived, and only long enough to call and tell me what had happened. "Which was what?" Alexander demanded. He had seen the news on CNN about the attack at the convention center in Prague. At the time he had hoped that it had nothing to do with greeting the students, but he had known at the time it had been wishful thinking. Both of the guard had been outside the main doors waiting to pick up surveillance on the children when they left. 3 rogues came in from another door and got into the room where the students were. They attacked 3 students. Western Prep. Edmund shook his head. They were 3 random students. The center broke into chaos. Clarson took the 3 students out a side door and disappeared. And the guard. They went in as soon as they heard the noise. The rogues were waiting for them and killed all of them. Only Eustace got away to make the phone call that there was something wrong. He was killed halfway through the call. William took over from there. The rogue who killed the guard took the phone and informed Dad that our children were captured and would be ransomed to the highest bidder. "Do they have them?" Alexander asked. Although Lycans lived by a strict law of never lying, rogues tended to break every law they could. Lying washed above the nature of a rogue. William shrugged a shoulder. "We got the surveillance cameras from the center. Clarson and the 3 students left by a side door. The rogues hadn't noticed them until it was too late. We don't think they have them. The yet was left out." Alexander knew that it would only be a matter of hours before the rogues found them. Greta was a human with no knowledge of the Lycan world and definitely with no knowledge of what was after her. Even though Patrick and Isabella were Lycans, they were only children. They may be aware of what was after them, but that would only increase their fear, not their skill of evading and escaping. "We both have men already flying over there," William said. "They'll be leaving within the hour," Alexander said. He stood up, signifying that he was done with the meeting. He had gotten all the information he knew he would get from William and Edmund. He needed to be in Prague. He should have gone with Greta. She had been his to protect. And he had failed. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Tell my men. It was done. Alexander would take his best men with him. They had no time to waste. The rogues would be after Greta and the students. They would find them first. Of that Alexander was certain. It was up to Alexander to find Greta and the children before they were killed by the rogues.